Elizabeth Miller and I went to school together. I knew about it, but she didn't. She developed early: large breasts, broad shoulders, thin waist, slender hips, a born athlete. Unfortunately, my development was delayed. I graduated from school with short stature, skinny chest, thin legs, and low weight. She was proud of her body and tried very hard to look as sexy as she really was. I went to school every day in jeans and a t-shirt that was too big for me. Because of this, my breasts seemed a little larger. At the beginning of the school year, all the girls waited to see what Elizabeth would wear, as it was the latest fashion for the year. No one even remembered seeing me at school. Elizabeth was a star tennis player, beginning to take lessons at age 10. Her height gave her an advantage in strength and endurance over smaller girls. I was the last guy chosen for the team in gym class. What I lacked in merit, I made up for in perseverance and determination. Distance running was not a team sport. I couldn't be knocked down, pushed, or hit, so it was my sport and I was good at it. Her social calendar was full of dates with tough guys, rich guys, star athletes, and fraternities. My calendar remained quite free all 4 years. I spent my time on electronic gadgets and computers in the garage. Every fall, Elizabeth got a new car in which she drove to school. I rode a bicycle all 4 years. Elizabeth always talked to the boys during lessons. Since my name was Jeff Mullen, we often sat next to each other in class. In 4 years, she spoke to me once. The teacher was handing out tests. Elizabeth turned to me, handed me the test, and said, "Here." Her father owned Miller Manufacturing, a well-established and profitable local company. It was founded by his grandfather, now run by his father, and employs 160 people. One of these people was my father, who worked at a factory as a machinist. This was his only job after returning from the army. Elizabeth sat next to me at graduation. It seemed to me that she had nothing on under her prom dress. It was difficult for me to contain myself. She looked at me amusedly several times as I squirmed, trying to hide my reaction. After finishing school, I went to college to become a process engineer. I read that Elizabeth received a full scholarship to a prestigious school to play tennis. Her photo appeared several times on the sports page of our local newspaper. During my freshman and sophomore years in college, I grew 5 inches and added almost 50 pounds of muscle from running. Being an excellent student, a smart young man, I confidently moved into my first year. I was able to demonstrate my sexual prowess at a high level to several attractive girls. During the Christmas holidays, I went to my parents' house. One evening, I went to a party hosted by one of my classmates. Elizabeth looked impressive and was very drunk. Her tipsy boyfriend, whom she had been dating for a week, was completely drunk and made rude remarks about her. She slapped him hard and said, "I'm leaving here. Please don't call me ever again." Since I was the only person who didn't fall over drunk, she told me to take her home. The sun streamed through the bedroom window as I slowly emerged from the fog of sleep. Elizabeth was still lying in my arms, but I felt a slight movement. Suddenly she tensed, realizing that something was wrong. She turned to face me. The distance between us was less than a foot. "What the hell is this? What are you doing in my bed? Who let you in here?" The volume of each question increased significantly. She jumped out of bed and, spreading her legs and putting her hands on her hips, stared at me threateningly. The eyes were blazing, and the growl did not leave the lips. "Who the fuck are you?" I had to act quickly or this piece of heaven would turn into hell. Jumping out of bed and standing in front of her, I said decisively, "I'm the guy you asked to take you to this apartment when you were completely drunk. I'm the one who wouldn't let you into the taxi that would take the drunk beauty back to the taxi depot so all the guys could use her. I'm the guy who has the car that you unfortunately vomited in last night when I brought you here. I'm the one who picked you up from the sidewalk so you wouldn't lie there and get frostbite or freeze to death. Any of these tragedies would have ruined your tennis career. I am the one who carried you into this apartment, into the bathroom, and held you while you prayed to the porcelain god of toiletries. I'm the one who kept you in the shower to wash away the effects of the evening. I'm the guy who didn't have sex with you while you were drunk. This is who I am and why I am here. You don't remember last night, and I can understand your confusion." Her posture did not change, but her grinning mouth softened. She said quietly, I must have really tied myself up last night. I remember some fragments, but nothing coherent. Do I know you? You know me, but you don't remember. My name is Jeff Mullen, and I sat next to you in most of our classes in high school. I was a skinny guy in jeans and a t-shirt. Geek squared. Elizabeth commented, "You must be joking. I remember that you got better grades than me. I copied several tests from you." I confessed, "To be honest, I made sure you saw my tests. I was embarrassed to talk to you and was afraid that if you told me anything, I wouldn't be able to answer you." We both laughed, and the tension of waking up naked together eased. "Now that you know I'm not Jack the Ripper, may I offer you some toast and black coffee to make up for the lousy alcohol you consumed last night?" She smiled. "Yes, please." As I turned to walk into the kitchen, I looked at Elizabeth in the mirror on the wall. I saw that she was also looking at me and noticed a slight smile and a nod of her head. While the coffee was brewing, I toasted some bread, topped it with butter and a generous dollop of grape jelly to give me some energy to start the day. I found a small white apron on the kitchen table and put it on. With a plate in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, I returned to the bedroom to Elizabeth's cheerful laughter. She liked my attempt at modesty. I covered myself with an apron and put the coffee and plate on the night table. "There's a lot of jelly on this bread. Please bring me a napkin, otherwise I'll spill it on my tits," she said. I smiled. "You don't need a napkin. Grape jelly is my favorite. I can't get enough of it." Smiling, I went to the kitchen for a cup of coffee. When I returned, grape jelly was everywhere. She smiled. "Oh, I think I spilled it on myself." With a big smile, I started kissing her lips and then licking the jelly from her face. I knew that guys can be selfish, who care about their own pleasure first, and then about their partner, but for me it was a different program. Not that I'm complaining, but the good thing is that I did a lot of long-distance running, which requires concentration. After showering together, we found a dry spot on the sheets and just relaxed, holding each other. I asked her why she was living with Carol and not with her parents. She answered very quietly, "It's difficult. It has to do with family relationships. I don't get along very well with my brothers." I quickly changed the subject. "What are you doing later today?" She changed her expression to a more pleasant one. "In the morning, I run pre-Christmas errands, and at 14 hours, I have a tennis match." "There's a whole foot of snow on the ground. How can you play tennis?" I asked. "Indoor tennis court at the country club, Jeff." Life was going well. Before this, in November, I arranged a job interview at 13 or in the afternoon. Interestingly, as fate would have it, I scheduled an interview with Robert Miller, president and chairman of the board of directors of Miller Manufacturing, Inc. What are the chances of getting an interview with the person whose daughter I spent the morning with? And I'm planning to spend this evening. The last time I wore a suit was to my high school graduation, so last week I bought a new suit for that occasion. I was excited and scared about this meeting, no matter what happened between me and Elizabeth this morning. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door to the Miller Manufacturing corporate office and said hi to my cousin Sally. My mother and Sally's mother were sisters, and Sally was born 5 years before me. Sally smiled at me and asked me to sit down while she went to tell Mr. Miller that he had an appointment. With a wink at Sally, I entered the office, which was paneled with wood that was probably cut from a small oak forest. Mr. Miller stood up, shook my hand, and invited me to sit in one of the soft chairs under the portraits of himself and his father. Mr. Miller asked me why I wanted to talk to him. I answered, "I'm a freshman at State University looking for a summer internship, and Miller Manufacturing was at the top of my list." "Why Miller Manufacturing?" "There are other promising companies that could attract a bright young man like you," Mr. Miller asked. "Sir, this city is my home. I went to school here. My family has lived here for over 100 years. My father has been working here since he returned from the army. I remember how, as a little boy, I walked into your workshop with my father and admired the large machines. I inherited a deep understanding of industry from my father. I think I can be very useful to your organization. College graduates with my GPA aren't looking to move to this city. They want to go to Chicago, Dallas, or Houston. I want to be here, in this city, to work in your company. I know I have to prove my competence to you, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. This year, I plan to do a summer internship with you with the prospect that in May, next year, you will hire me permanently. Jeff, you said that you are a first-year student and graduated from our local high school. Do you know my daughter Elizabeth? Oh God, I have to be careful, I thought. Swallowing, I said. I knew your daughter at school, but we didn't move in the same circles. Mr. Miller replied, I don't remember you being one of the long line of boys who passed through my house. Oh, what will you do for me this summer, Jeff? I responded to his remark, Sir, I'll start by sweeping the floors, cleaning and emptying the trash cans. This summer, in an industrial efficiency class, I conducted a case study of your company. This statement made him sit on the edge of his chair. Go on, he said. Miller Manufacturing stops production every day at 4 p.m. to clean machines, sweep floors, and replenish supplies. You use your highest-paid employees for cleaning, 12-hour versus 50-hour. I suggest that drivers work until 5 p.m. and then leave the area. Cleaners, low-wage employees, and summer interns will do what is necessary to complete the day and prepare for tomorrow. You need to make sure that these low-paid workers change their work schedule so that even if they stay past 5 p.m., they don't exceed 40 hours a week. Jeff, could you provide me with a copy of your analysis? Of course, sir, but I don't have a copy right yet, which caused an approving laugh. How much will this brainpower cost me this summer, Jeff? My plan, Mr. Miller, is for you to set the price starting at minimum wage. Then let me earn any raise. Mr. Miller said, You convinced me that we really need new blood. Let's plan for you to be our first summer intern next June. Should I send you a contract? No, sir, I said. I don't need a contract. Your handshake is enough for me. With these words, I stood up and left his office, winking at Sally goodbye. Let's talk about a good mood, so good that I thought I was invincible. With these thoughts in mind, I drove to the country club to watch Elizabeth's tennis lesson. When I entered the room, I could hear a very intense match going on with volleys going back and forth. I found a quiet corner and watched her play. She was powerful, fast, graceful, and very competitive. She did not give up before any blow that could bypass her. I was proud that I was able to start a relationship with her. When she won the set and went to get a towel and a water bottle, she saw me. I was surprised that she recognized me in the suit. She called me onto the court, kissed me, and said, Thank you for being interested in my tennis. Elizabeth, you are wasting a lot of energy. Can I take you out to dinner so you can replenish your carbs? Yes, you can, Jeff. Pick me up at my apartment at 6:30, okay? I will, I grinned. We went to Leone's for pizza and beer and spent time getting to know each other. All you have to do with Elizabeth is ask her a question about yourself, and the evening is a success. She really has a story to tell and is a very interesting person. She loves tennis and wants to make a career in it, play professionally, and then become a coach. She was very impressed that I came to watch her play tennis. Most of her past boyfriends weren't interested in anything other than sex with her. She appreciated my interest in her life outside the bedroom. I asked her about her family, but she didn't want to spend much time on the topic. She had 2 older brothers who worked for Miller Manufacturing, and she apparently didn't like either of them. According to her, one of them was a seedy salesman, and the other was a weak accountant. Her father was a good man, but he spent most of his life at work. The mother was a bitch and made the lives of everyone around her miserable. Thus, her father spent time at the factory. Since we had already been talking about her for more than an hour, she asked me, Why did you come to my tennis match in a suit? Don't you know anything about tennis? Yes, I play a little, but not at your level. Just wanted to see what interests you. The reason I was wearing a suit is because I had an interview this afternoon for a summer intern position that I hope will work there after graduation. I made an appointment last month when I knew I would be home for Christmas. How did your interview go, Jeff? Great. I got a job as a summer intern in June and plan to go full-time after graduation. Then she said the words I was so afraid of. What company? With all caution, I replied, "Today I met with the president of Miller Manufacturing." "What? What are you doing? Have you met my father?" Elizabeth screamed. Before I could say anything, she said, "I thought you were different. Are you using me to get to my father?" Incredible. When she started to get up to leave, I grabbed her hand sharply and hissed, "Sit. I just told you that I made this appointment last month. At the beginning of this week, you didn't even know my name. We slept together after we agreed to meet. I told you that my specialty is industrial engineering. What other company could I work for in this city other than Miller Manufacturing? Please be quiet for a minute and think. I'm not using you to get to your father. Please, Elizabeth, don't let this coincidence ruin our evening." The look in her eyes could cut me in two like one of the plasma cutters in a factory. She sat and breathed deeply, as if she had just lost the first set of a tennis match. Finally, she said, "I understand, but still, how coincidental is it that you showed up out of nowhere the day before you had an appointment with my father, the same day you started dating me? There is very little chance of this happening. Did my name come up in conversation?" "Yes." She rolled her eyes and launched her laser gaze again. "And?" "Your father asked if we were in the same class and if I knew you. I told him that we studied in the same class but went in different circles. This is where my comments end. He said, 'I'm not like one of the parade of young men who come to his house to see you. Elizabeth, I wanted to tell you about this before your father asks you if you know his new summer intern. I didn't want this question to take you by surprise. I'm grateful, Jeff, that you told me about this before father asked about you. You acted so prudently. How will this affect us dating?' Holding her hand, I told her, 'I really enjoy your company. You are the most interesting person I have ever met. I really want our relationship to develop. It's no big deal that I'll be working for your dad this summer. He can fire me on the first day. So let's see where this leads. You do not mind?' She smiled. 'You have a goal, to work in the field of industrial engineering, and I have tennis. We can go in different directions, but for now, let's just enjoy ourselves and each other. By the way, let's go back to the apartment. But all good things come to an end.'" Elizabeth had tears in her eyes when we both had to leave town and go back to school. For several weeks, we called each other daily. Then the calls turned into emails. On Valentine's Day, we exchanged cards with declarations of love. June 1st was my first day working at Miller Manufacturing as a summer intern, the company's first summer intern. The work was interesting. I learned how parts are made and how each product is designed. All the guys at the plant treated me well and appreciated my interest in their work. It also helped that my father was the head of the department. Mr. Miller accepted my suggestion that the shop floor be cleaned up at the end of the day by lower-level workers, not the main ones. One day in mid-June, I was sweeping the floor before closing when I heard a woman's voice, "Cleaner. My boyfriend is a cleaner." My God, how humiliating this is for me. Turning around, I saw the beautiful Elizabeth in a bright, sunny dress, looking spectacular. I moved to hug her, but she pushed me away. I don't hug dirty cleaners. I might hug a young, energetic intern if he was clean and agreed to take me to dinner. I will arrange a meeting with a clean, energetic, young intern at any time and place you designate, I replied. At 6 in the evening, my parents' house. I don't know whether he will be able to find his way to a more decent area of the city or not. In any case, I'll leave at 18:05 if he can't find it. I'll tell him about this. With that, she turned around quickly enough that the hem of her loose sundress flew up, showing off her tanned and muscular legs. The remaining guys in the workshop howled with laughter as they watched this exchange. I wasn't laughing. My car pulled up to the Miller's house at 5:45 p.m. I had no intention of being late for my meeting with Elizabeth. Through the peephole on the front door, Elizabeth saw me arrive but did not open the door. Okay, let's play this game, I thought. At 5:55 p.m., I walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. Good thing I had a nice pair of khakis and my best shirt for the occasion. An elegantly dressed black woman opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Yes, ma'am, you can. Jeffrey Mullen." Please see Miss Elizabeth Miller." With a slight grin, the black woman replied, "Yes, Mr. Mullen. Miss Elizabeth is expecting you. Please have a seat." At exactly 6 o'clock, Elizabeth came down the stairs and smiled at me. "I thought you wouldn't come. The janitor doesn't usually come to the front door of the board chairman's residence." "You're right, the janitor." "No, but the first summer intern." "Yes." "Can I introduce you to my parents?" asked Elizabeth. "I'd love to meet them," I replied. Elizabeth pulled me with her into the large living room where her father was reading and her mother was watching TV. "Father, Mother, I would like to introduce you to my companion for this evening, Mr. Jeffrey Mullen." I turned to Mr. Miller and nodded. "Good evening, sir." Mr. Miller smiled. "Good to see you, Jeff." Then I turned to her mother. "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Miller." At this moment, she growled, "Is this your friend, the janitor?" "Of course, you could find a younger man with higher expectations." She answered her mother, "Oh, Mom, I think Jeffrey has high expectations. So much so that please don't expect me home in the evening. I almost died in the living room. Why is she putting me in this position?" It was unexpected. Elizabeth took my hand and said softly, "Come on, Jeffrey, we haven't seen each other for so long." I turned to the shocked couple and said, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Miller. Good night, sir." Mrs. Miller just chuckled. Mr. Miller grinned. "Tomorrow at 7:30 a.m., right, Jeff?" "Yes, sir," I replied. Elizabeth was laughing so hard she could barely catch her breath when we got into the car. I was stunned. I didn't know whether to be angry, humiliated, or just laugh at it. "What was it? Why did you do this to me? Why did you do this to them? I just don't understand the purpose for which this was done." Elizabeth laughed. "It was a demonstration to my mother of why we are together. Think quickly. Be able to control yourself in any situation. Like tonight, when you were thrown to the wolves by Mrs. Miller. You were cool, calm, and collected. I couldn't have scripted your behavior better. From Marjorie's appearance at the door to her mother's reaction. You were great. It makes me happy, Elizabeth. I really enjoy our time together, whether in bed or out of it. However, I am worried about my job tomorrow. How will your father react to your daring antics? This job is as important to me as your tennis is to you. Could you think a little about what I want to do or be in my life? What is important to you is also important to me. Could you give me the same attention? I'm used to getting my way, Jeff, but I'll try to think about your feelings before I make a problem for you." Changing the subject, I asked Elizabeth, "I haven't heard from you for the last couple of weeks. What's happened? Absence makes the heart grow happier. Is this the answer to your question?" "I've certainly missed you these last few months, Elizabeth." "I'm glad you missed me, Jeff. It makes me feel important to you." After we were seated at the best steakhouse in town, I said, "Let me raise a toast to you being in town and making it a great place." After drinking a little red wine, I asked, "How long have you been in the city and why did you stop by now without contacting me?" It was an unplanned trip on my part. My father asked me to come back to sign some corporate papers since I am on the board of directors of Miller Manufacturing. When you try to increase your scores with me tonight, remember that I am also your boss at Miller Manufacturing. I will feel bad about it if I check the box unsatisfactory performance in any of your certificates. I tried to act surprised, but I had studied Miller's corporate structure before starting my job as a summer intern and knew its status. "Oh, really? I didn't know that." To which Elizabeth replied, "Hell no, you didn't know that," and smiled slyly. I raised my glass, touched hers, and smiled back. She knew that I had done research and found that Elizabeth, John, and Sam each had 30% shares, and several older workers had 10%. Mr. Miller retained voting rights to all their shares. Since I had to be at work at 7:30 a.m. and Elizabeth hadn't gotten much sleep the night before, we didn't get to talk or have fun that morning. She took off shortly before noon that day. She spent the summer working at tennis camps in Wisconsin. She taught a little, babysat a little, did a little housekeeping, and played a lot of tennis. We exchanged letters, calls, and emails, but did not communicate until Christmas. She had her own world, and I had mine. I spent the rest of the summer learning about the precision parts business. Miller had been around for a long time and had a large list of clients, especially in the airline business. They did significant business with Boeing, Spirit Aerosystems, and Cessna. The head of marketing for Miller Manufacturing was John Miller, Robert Miller's firstborn son and Elizabeth's older brother. He considered me a complete irritant. When he found out that I was Elizabeth's boyfriend, he became especially disrespectful toward his little sister. He didn't call her Elizabeth, but boss sister, bitch in heels, or simply boss. He was 8 years older than Elizabeth, and she, according to Robert, was especially proud of the fact that she annoyed him at every opportunity. John knew nothing about marketing tight tolerance parts. He used the old sales mantra of the 1960s and 1970s, get them drunk, sleep with them, and then sign with them. Knowledgeable order buyers contacted the shop manager directly to find out the parts quantities and specifications their companies needed. This did not stop John from spending a lot of the company's money on drinking and partying on behalf of the company. Robert put up with this because he was part of the family, and John, his wife and children would starve if John had to work for someone else. With the middle brother Sam, things were sad. Quiet, difficult to communicate with, and completely incompetent in his role as a materials purchasing manager. Often, the entire plant had to be shut down because Sam didn't order the right materials for production. Away from the factory, all he did was drink and fish. He went to work irregularly. Brother John said that boss bullied him and he didn't have the fortitude to stand up to her. He was not married and kept to himself. With my inquisitive mind, I found new methods and products for Miller Manufacturing. While working, I came up with a new way to quickly disconnect farm equipment from tractors. I told my father about my invention and that I was thinking of bringing it to Robert's attention. "Don't waste time," said Dad. "Robert will give it to John, who will laugh at him and throw him away. If Robert asks John about it, John will give it to Sam to calculate the cost of materials, and there it will die a second death." Several workers had ideas that could be sold, but they were all suppressed. I asked my father about how to get a patent for the company myself, but this idea suffered the same fate as the others. Since one of my industrial engineering courses was on patent science, I decided to go it alone. The first thing I had to do was create a limited liability corporation, which I called Mullen Marketing LLC. I used my free time and extracurricular work to create and test a prototype. I needed to find a patent attorney, so I turned to local attorney Craig. I met Craig around town a few times and played golf with him at men's nights. He was a senior when I was a sophomore in high school. He said his law school roommate worked for a firm that specialized in patents, and he gave me the contact. By the end of the summer, I had filed 4 patent applications. Throughout this time, Elizabeth and I kept in touch by email and phone. Her whole life revolved around tennis, and mine revolved around engineering. We were able to spend one night together at Christmas because Robert took the family to Naples, Florida for the holidays. It was a sweet reunion for the two of us, with lots of sex, lying naked in a hotel room, and just being ourselves. We talked a little about the future and how we will fit into it. There were no decisions, but ideas were in the air. There was still a spark between us. As I was studying for my final exams in college, my lawyer called and said that he had been corresponding with a patent attorney friend about my patents. "Are you willing to accept a check for $250,000 for your rapid release patent?" "Of course I will," I exclaimed. Craig said his friend agrees, but thinks you might as well get a royalty of $1 per unit over 10 years if you insist on more. Craig warned me to keep it a secret after all. You did all the work at the Miller plant. I know John Miller will try to get as much of this money out of you as possible. Just deposit them with Mullen Marketing and use them as needed. Don't even tell your father about this, as other employees will be jealous and find out. Craig had another deal for me. He knew I was coming back to town to work at Miller. He asked me if I would live at home. I replied that for now, but soon they would want to discharge me. He said the bank had a very nice house that they had foreclosed on and wanted to sell. It was battered inside, but the structure was strong. It needed some redecorating, and I figured I could handle it. We could use some of the money from the patent for the down payment, and the bank would take over the rest. I agreed and became the owner of the house. Robert Miller and I agreed that I would become a full-time employee of Miller Manufacturing as chief engineer. The salary was not as high as that of my classmates, but here I had a chance to become very successful. It's a good thing I was young and ambitious because I worked 45 hours a week and then went off to renovate my new house. There was no time for parties, golf, or women. I tried to contact Elizabeth as often as possible, but she was just starting out on the tour and was difficult to contact. One day, she showed up and just walked into the house while I was painting the living room. The room was in disarray. Clothes were lying around. The furniture was stained. Her comment was, "What kind of pigsty are you creating here?" "I think it will be more of a love shack than a pigsty," I replied. Her rude comment was, "I can't confirm this. You have absolutely no taste or style. I'm embarrassed to be here, and I'm the one looking at your finished product. Looks like you're remodeling a barn. You've been working on this for months. Why don't you just finish it?" That's exactly what I'm doing, finishing it off. I also have a job that I go to, Elizabeth. The members of the board of directors are constantly breathing down my neck. He grinned. She waved her hand majestically. "Just hire someone. I came here for sex, but I don't want to do it in a construction zone. Get us a room at the Hyatt tonight." Of course, I complied with her wishes and was well rewarded that evening. During the summer, Elizabeth usually showed up unannounced between tournaments. We'd spend time together, and then she'd disappear again for weeks. One day, when she was at home, she brought her clothes to wash them at my house. When she dumped her entire suitcase on the floor, a package of condoms spilled out. I looked at the packaging, then at her. She shrugged and said with a grin, "A girl can't be too careful." I wanted to be angry, but we weren't married, engaged, or even living together, so I had nothing but pride. There were several tournaments that I went to because it was convenient. Once I agreed with her about a trip before the start of the tournament. We were having a great time, but I noticed that a few guys were coming up to talk to her, and she was brushing them off, and they were saying something like, "Yes, I forgot. Sorry." It seemed that if I had not been there, some communication would have occurred. We continued to communicate long distance until the tennis tours ended. My work was going great, and I implemented a number of procedures that made the plant more efficient and more profitable. As I delved deeper into the products we made, I began to have more and more ideas for patents. By the end of the first year of work, I had saved up quite a lot of money. This arrangement worked well for Miller Manufacturing because I paid our employees at the standard rate for labor on my projects and the full cost of raw materials and supplies. As these patents progressed to market, I was particularly careful to ensure that the first batch of product under the new patent was produced at Miller Manufacturing. I brought in more new business than our marketing director. The house was several levels above the pigsty when Elizabeth visited me once again. She was upset because the road had knocked her down. She had gotten off her father's medical plan and needed more time off that wouldn't cost her any winnings she might have received. She didn't want to spend time with her parents at all. At that moment, inspiration struck me. I turned to her and said, "Why don't you marry me? You will be able to have health insurance, relax in a peaceful place, and be with someone who loves you." I expected a huge laugh from her. She placed both hands on either side of my face and said, "This is so cute, so nice that I think I'll take you up on your offer. It wasn't what I expected, but I'll certainly accept the result. I'm caught in a young man's trinity, a new wife who is gorgeous, loves sex with me, and is extremely rich. What could go wrong?" Planning the wedding was a disaster. If earlier I thought that Elizabeth and her mother did not get along with each other, now a real war has begun between them. The mother wanted to organize a social event for her friends. Elizabeth wanted a more casual event with tennis players and sororities. At the meeting between the bride and groom and their mother, none of the Miller women even looked at my mother for her opinion, only screams and screams between them. Mrs. Miller still called me janitor boy. My mother left the meeting without any of them noticing or inquiring about her. We ended up going to Las Vegas and getting married. We were both the happiest we've ever been in our lives. I had a great job, she was on tour. but she came home as often as she could for lots of fun, sex, and companionship. We had a good time together. For several years while she was on tour, life was good. She didn't make a lot of money, but she carried on well. She continued to receive very generous quarterly dividends on her Miller Manufacturing shares. I told her that she could share part of these dividends with me since I am the source of these dividends. She answered, "You're just lucky. I didn't fire you and transfer you back to janitors." A few weeks later, she called me, sobbing and screaming. I couldn't understand what she was saying. "Maybe I should come?" She agreed, and I flew out that evening. Entering the room, I found her with her right leg raised, on which lay an ice pack. Apparently, she either tore or sprained a ligament. We left to receive medical care at home, not on the road. Our doctor suggested that the ligament was stretched and not torn, but an MRI would confirm this. In the preparation room, the nurse was going through a checklist and asked if she was pregnant. Elizabeth replied, "No, I take pills." The nurse said, "We need to confirm this in all women your age before the MRI, so please take a pregnancy test." When Elizabeth came out of the bathroom, she was ashen-faced. "This is wrong. I'm not pregnant. I can't be pregnant. I take pills and use them." She stopped mid-sentence. "What is this? Did she mean that she uses protective equipment when she's not with me? This requires further research. I had to act very carefully." The nurse pulled out a different brand of pregnancy test, and the results were the same. Elizabeth was inconsolable. "Please, not now. Not with me." I tried to convince her that everything would be okay, because she would be in bed for almost a year before she could return to tennis competitions. Elizabeth got a job as a tennis coach at a girls' school. Although she couldn't play, she did a great job teaching the girls tennis strategy. Don't just hit the ball over the net. Her girls won the state meet in their class. She used the school's sports equipment to rehabilitate and strengthen her knee. To say that Elizabeth did not like the pregnancy would be an understatement. Every day the belly grew larger, and this could not but cause dissatisfaction. Everything in the world was wrong. Her breasts became huge, and when I asked if she was going to breastfeed, she replied, "No way in the world am I going to do this." The birth did not go entirely smoothly, and she spent some time in the delivery room. I was in the delivery room when the nurse said to her, "You are a happy mother of 2 boys." While she was in the hospital, she told the doctor that she needed to get a 2-ball ligation so she wouldn't get pregnant again. I told her that it would be easier for me to have a vasectomy than a 2-ball ligation. She answered, "No, I want my tubes tied." The thought occurred to me that if I did a vasectomy, she could still get pregnant from the guy. This may be the reason for her surgery and not mine. When we arrived home with Cameron and Cody, my mom and grandma were there to help. Elizabeth had virtually no mothering skills, so she was glad to have their help. My grandmother was 70 years old, and she loved children very much. For the first 2 months, she was at our house from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Elizabeth was glad that she had a personal nanny. She continued to do physical therapy to rehabilitate her knee and begin playing tennis again. A year later, my mother retired and began working as a full-time nanny for us. Elizabeth was fully mobile and playing tennis again. With her mobility restored, Elizabeth began attending tennis matches, tennis tournaments, tennis clinics, tennis symposiums, and anything related to the word tennis. After all, she was rich, she didn't have a job, and there were other people who had to take care of her family responsibilities. Given that I already had doubts about her fidelity, I asked a private investigator to bug her car for location and sound. They also hacked her cell phone, so I had records of text messages and emails. It was expensive, but so was the divorce. Her mood did not improve because nothing in our house suited her. I repainted the rooms the wrong color. She needed more closet space. My family heirlooms needed to be put into storage. Everything connected with me seemed unworthy of being in her house. I tried to come home early from work to help her around the house, but everything I did just irritated her. Everything I did, folding towels, vacuuming, taking out the trash, was criticized and belittled. Nothing I did made her happy. When Mom left for the day, I stayed with the boys. This was the only joy in the house for me. Living in a middle-class neighborhood irritated her. Everyone was below her in style, social status, and income level. She received generous dividends from Miller, which she intended to spend every penny of, because in 90 days, there would be another check. She made us join the country club with our own membership. While someone else looked after the boys, she ate lunch at the country club every day. This really annoyed me. She spent money and ignored our children. By this time, I had done a DNA test on the boys, and it turned out that I was their father. Our vibrant sex life has been reduced to a minimum. By this time, there was much more evidence for divorce than for staying married. I needed to somehow get out of this situation. I liked boys, and she could use that against me. She was a co-owner of my employer, so I could have been unemployed. Miller Manufacturing was a well-respected company in the industry, and a bad recommendation from them could have had a negative impact on my career. My salvation came from an unusual source: real estate. She decided she was tired of these middle-class slums and we should buy a multi-million-dollar house in the country club annex. The payout would eat up all of its dividends. But she didn't care. She demanded this house. I think it was because it was bigger and more expensive than her mother's house. At the same time, I was working on acquiring several expensive CNC machines for my LLC to lease to Miller. By this time, Robert Miller had died, and I was essentially running the plant. John was the president, but he just dumped everything on me except setting dividends. I had a new position: operations manager, and I told John that I needed a new job description, to which he replied, "Of course, do it." My buddy Craig came to mind, and we wrote a new job description that gave me more flexibility to do things my way, including the acquisition of equipment, which was extremely necessary to maintain competitiveness. My purchase limit without board approval was $500,000. The Mullen Machine Company purchased the equipment and leased it to Miller. The physical equipment required major improvements, which reduced net income and, consequently, dividends. Although Mullen Machine was very profitable, I still needed a loan to purchase the equipment. I asked my banker if Elizabeth could buy an expensive house while I bought equipment. He replied that I would not be able to get a loan for equipment if I was participating in the payment for a new house. She couldn't get a loan without showing my income. We were at an impasse until Craig suggested we draw up a post-nuptial agreement. The post-nuptial agreement was very similar to a divorce settlement agreement. I would transfer any financial interest I had in any of her personal assets, including her Miller Manufacturing stock. I won't be on the will for the house or on the promissory note for the new mansion. However, I will pay rent to boss for every month I live in this house. The rent was equal to 1/2 the mortgage payment on the house, plus insurance and taxes. Craig did a great job of including this clause in the prenuptial agreement. He knew that my ultimate goal was to be completely free of her control. She didn't know how limited the time I would have to pay rent would be. Craig wrote that I agreed to pay half of everything for the rest of my life, just like in a divorce. I showed no debt on this expensive home, allowing me to expand with the Mullen Marketing LLC loans I needed. According to her and her lawyer, I had nothing but my little LLC and my clothes. I couldn't touch her assets. In their arrogance, they were not interested in getting half of my paltry assets. They didn't know that her company's shares were falling in price every day. Consequently, dividends will decrease, and it will become more and more difficult to make all payments. She let herself into a deep gorge from which there was no way out, and did not know it. I'm sure that during the preparation of the separation agreement, her lawyer either slept with her or wanted to get her into bed, so he let her make the decisions. After all, she knows everything and doesn't need advice. Now that the division of property is complete, I can proceed with John Miller's shares. John was heavily in debt, spending more than his salary and company dividends. Booze, fast cars, and fast women did their job. I was always nice to his wife, Cherie, and one day she called me and asked me to help him get John to cut back on his spending. I told her I would try and talk to John, but he told me to mind my own business. And since I can't control my wife, how can I talk to him about controlling his bad habits? "You're probably right, John," I said. I just want you to know that I care about you, and if you have problems, you can count on me to help." He changed his behavior and thanked me for my concern. I actually planned to help him by buying his shares at a discount. All that remains is to wait until he gets into a difficult situation. Such a jam came a month later, when he was arrested for driving while intoxicated with illegal substances in his hands. He told me he needed at least $1 million to get out of trouble. Troubles included gambling debts to people who did not believe in recovering the debt through legal action. John knew that if he went to prison without paying these debts, he would not come out alive. I told him I'd lend him $1 million against his $6 million stock. However, at the same time, he will have to transfer all shares and voting rights to me. I told him that he could buy back these shares for $1 million at any time within the next year without interest. This agreement was not assignable. John was very grateful for my help. Between legal fees and gambling debts, John had enough money to move to Las Vegas and become a professional gambler. This was the dream of his whole life. This gave me confidence that he would never be able to buy back his shares on time. As collateral for the loan, the bank took my shares of Miller Manufacturing and shares of my LLC. Craig drew up the agreement and congratulated me on gaining control of John's shares. I now controlled 40% of the outstanding shares, including employee shares. Another 11%, and I would have received a controlling stake. Sam Miller gave me more and more purchasing responsibilities. He was either not in the office, or he was sitting at his desk and looking outside. Since he and I were getting along well, I asked him what was the matter. "I just can't do this anymore," Sam replied. "This is more pressure than I can handle. My doctor prescribed me the maximum dose of antidepressants. Jeff, I have to leave here or die of a stroke. I know you lent money to my brother when he was in trouble. I thank you for this." I paused, then said, "I will do my best to help you. The first question is, what do you want to do for the rest of your life?" "There is nothing more tempting to me," said Sam, "than just living in my house in the forest, fishing and hunting every day. No one was around. No pressure. No expectations. No drama. My brain was on alert. You want to sell me your shares of Miller Manufacturing?" "No," Sam said. "I tried, but no one wants to buy a 30% stake in Miller Manufacturing. Not with John and Elizabeth controlling the shares. They know that these two will simply deceive all the minority shareholders just like me. Then I will have to worry about how to invest my money wisely and whether it will be enough for me to live on. How about you just pay me this much every month for the rest of my life and I'll transfer my shares to you?" "I can do this, Sam. How much do you need per month?" "Jeff, I can live comfortably on $10,000 a month." "I can do it, Sam. Let me fill out all the paperwork, and you clean your office and submit your resignation letter." "Thank you, Jeff. You are a great friend who helped me." Craig was thrilled when I told him I needed a lifetime contract to pay Sam $10,000 a month. He almost shouted Sam would have to live almost 50 years to get the full value of these shares. In addition, Sam is a sick man. He will not live even 10 years. "It's true, Craig, but in this situation, he will be happy for 10 years. You, my friend, completely control Miller Manufacturing. Congratulations," Craig exclaimed. "Thank you, Craig. I appreciate your legal expertise in drafting these agreements. Eliza the bitch no longer controls me and the boys. It's time to tighten the screws on her. My first house in the city wasn't good enough for Elizabeth. After spending so much time renovating it, I just didn't want to sell it. I kept it as a rental, but the last tenants moved out 5 months ago, and I still haven't found any new ones. This was good luck for me and the boys. It was the 1st of September, and Elizabeth was in New York for the US Open, watching the game and having fun with someone. I was able to move the few personal items I was allowed to have in the mansion to our old house without any problems. By evening, the boys and I had already settled down. They stopped asking about Mom because she was rarely around, and when she was, she scared them. I tried to reach her several times, and I knew that it would be inconvenient if she was with a new lover. I would either get a voicemail or a very short reply. There was no call back. After all of our personal belongings were removed from the mansion, I left Elizabeth a note that I would not be giving her the September rent check because I had moved out of the house. The next morning at the office, the first thing Sally did was send 14 days' notice to all shareholders for a meeting. Topics of discussion included changes in shareholders, changes in management, and approval of dividends for the third quarter. She asked, "There's a lot going on here that I don't know about. Could you please enlighten me in case someone asks?" "Great news, Sally. I have now purchased all of John and Sam's Miller Manufacturing shares and have 70% of the voting rights. Elizabeth only has 30%, making her unimportant in our lives." Sally was delighted. "I've hated that bitch since I was in school. When Elizabeth returned from New York and saw my note informing me that I was leaving her home, she was furious. She called me and screamed, 'You must pay me this rent because I need it to pay off my payments. If you don't bring me that money, I'll increase my dividends to make up the difference. I will make sure that this difference is reduced in your salary. You are making a big mistake by contacting the owner of the company.' It was obvious that she had not communicated with her brothers regarding their transfer of their shares. I also knew that she had not bothered to read the notice of the shareholders' meeting that was to be held at the end of the week. The only people present at the shareholders' meeting were me with 60% of the shares, my father, who held 10% of the shares by proxy for the employees, Craig, the new corporate lawyer, and cousin Sally, who had been the secretary of the board of directors for many years. Elizabeth, who owns 30% of the shares, was not represented. The first step was to approve the transfer of shares from John and Sam Miller to me. The second is to promote me to president and chairman of the board of directors. The third decision is not to pay dividends to any of the shareholders due to a decrease in profits and an increase in purchases of modern equipment. All proposals were adopted unanimously. The meeting was closed. My father had just left my new office when Elizabeth and her lawyer burst into my office shouting, "Get out of my father's chair, you son of a bitch! You're fired, get out of here." It turned out that her lawyer had heard rumors about a change in ownership of Miller Manufacturing, and he called Elizabeth to confirm it. It was at this time that she opened the notice of the shareholders' meeting and read the agenda. It's a pity that the meeting was already closed. She growled, "Where are my brothers? You don't have power of attorney over them." "I don't need their powers of attorney," I replied. "I bought their shares, and the voting rights passed to me." This confrontation was expected, and I gave her copies of the share transfers, certified by a notary and unanimously approved by the majority of shareholders present at the meeting. Her lawyer grabbed the papers, waved his hand, and snorted, "This mess, I will tear you apart in court." He was posing for his client, and we both knew it. My efficient corporate secretary had already prepared the minutes of the meeting, and it was with great pleasure that I presented them to Elizabeth. I said, "Look where the transfer of shares was approved. I am now the president and chairman of the board of directors. And in general, please look at the wall behind you. There are 3 portraits of the board chairman of Miller Manufacturing, your grandfather, your father, and now me." The full gravity of the situation suddenly hit her. She couldn't pay for the mansion, the Mercedes, the country club dues, or the groceries. I knew she never saved or invested her dividends. Her shares were her savings, and no one would buy 30% of the shares now without dividends. "Jeff, I'll have your favorite steak dinner sent to my house from the country club. Could you join me so we can work out some details? I don't think you'll want a divorce, and I don't think there's a need for it. We need to think about our children, too. Would it be a good idea at, say, 6:30? I answered. She must be really desperate to involve the boys in this matter. After everything she dumped on me after we got married, the guys she had fun with, and she didn't care if I knew about it. I'm looking forward to this conversation." At 6:29, the bell rang, and the beautiful Elizabeth answered the door. The makeup and hair were done perfectly. The silk dress hugged her hips and put her breasts on full display. "Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Jeffrey, you didn't need to ring the doorbell. This is your home. I was just worried that I might disturb someone or something." "No, Jeff, it didn't interfere. Would you like a glass of wine?" "Yes, please," I said with all politeness. She started talking about business. I must say that you did not exceed my expectations from Miller Manufacturing, but you sped up the process by 20 years. How did you manage to get these two worthless brothers of mine to sell their shares to you? It was a brilliant move. Now we control the entire company, just you and me. I have champagne for a toast after dinner to celebrate this brilliant achievement. Elizabeth, for this to happen, it took me many hours of hard work and being in the right place at the right time. I had a lot of free time to work, since you were often not at home. To be clear, Elizabeth, the reason the boys and I are moving is because I'm filing for divorce later this week. This will not be a joint venture. I control the majority stake, and what I say will happen. You can hold shares and be a member of the board of directors for all I care, but we won't be paying dividends for at least a year. You can't do that, Jeff. This is my only source of income. How can I live? How can you do this to your loving wife? You are truly a loving wife, although you didn't love me. Jeff, I play with some guys, but I was loyal to you. Ask anyone in town. Elizabeth, for the last year, I have hired a private detective to follow you at all your tennis tournaments. You have very active fans. In his file, there is a huge pile of photographs and videos that prove that your last statement is a lie. The color disappeared from her face. How can she attack now? If you divorce me, Jeff, you will have to pay alimony and child support. It will be cheaper to stay married to me, I answered with pleasure. If you remember, we divided our assets in the post-contract. Your lawyer drafted it in such a way that I could not claim your property after the divorce. You protected yourself from me. What protected you now protects me. So no child support. You have a book value of $6 million in Miller Manufacturing, so the judge won't order alimony. She beamed. Great. Just pay me $6 million and I'll leave. Smiling widely, I said, Sorry, baby. I don't need your shares to control the company. My 70% already outweighs your 30%. I don't need to buy any more shares since I already have full control of the company. It's almost the same as if your shares are now worthless. We also don't have to pay dividends. I can guarantee you that as long as you own shares, this company will never pay dividends. I'll just give myself a bigger bonus if I need the money. Employees will see big bonuses before you receive dividends. I will transform this building into an exemplary center of modern production at the expense of the profits received. All this will be done without paying dividends to shareholders. And now, to get rid of you, I will pay you $100,000 for all your shares. This is approximately the value of a minority stake in this company. I continued, You will not receive child support since the boys live with me. They are afraid of you. I kept a calendar of the nights you spent in this house. How can you be a support for the boys if you are out of town for more than half the year? In addition, the private detective will provide photo and video evidence of your infidelity. The private investigator has names and can subpoena men who will tell the judge what you are like. There's no way you're getting custody of these boys. I doubt you'll want to have your dirty laundry displayed in the courtroom so the whole town can see what a woman you are for, smearing Miller's good name. Why are you doing this to me, Jeff? I love you. I have loved you for many years. Why? Why? I answered. You slept with dozens of men after we got married. You left town for several weeks without calling or contacting me. You only cared about yourself. The boys and I were nothing to you. Now you are nothing to us. Goodbye, Elizabeth. I turned and walked out the door. A free man, a happy father. Elizabeth couldn't make the next payment on the house and Mercedes. She has put the house on the market, but it will take several months for such an expensive house to sell unless the price is drastically reduced. Plus, she had very little equity in the house. The people who waited on Her Majesty while she lived there said that she took her things and left the city. The house was foreclosed on and the Mercedes was confiscated. However, I control a very profitable $20 million company and will never deal with them again. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.